Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. And he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now, you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
That's right. Now, this one's going to be hard to do anymore because the church is gone.
And so today he will be educating us on his Mater Dolorosa church. Now, tell us about the early history of this church.
All right. So the Polish people started coming to Holyoke around 1890 and to Chicopee around the same time. They actually came to Chicopee first, and of course, they were very devout people. They wanted a place to worship. And by 1896, the Mater Dolorosa parish started, but without a church. And it would meet sometimes in Eli School, which was on Eli Court in Holyoke. And then they'd meet after that in the Holy Rosary Church basement. And that place was set aside for them on purpose. And so for 7 years they did not have a church, but they were collecting money to get a church. And finally in 1903, the church was ready and it had its first mass. But the pastor was working so hard to get this going. His name was Antoni Sikorski. He would die in April 1903, only a few months after the church was ready. Now, the church itself was on Lyman Street in Holyoke. It was there from 1903 to about 5 years ago when they finally brought it down. The parishioners didn't want it to come down, of course, but they didn't own it. So the Springfield Diocese took it down. The parish itself was a very popular parish. And there's many very, very interesting things about this whole parish. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about the very early history, but along the way, we're also going to talk about its campus, so its school, convents, rectory, how it acquired a perpetual help church along the way, and then about the neighborhood around it. We'll talk about that, and then why it might have been taken down. But the early history includes that the convent was put up right behind it. A rectory was put up attached to the back of it in 1903. Now the convent was right towards the back because the school, the old school that's not there anymore, was put towards the back. And also this old Mater Dolorosa school was founded in 1906. And it was in the back part right behind the rectory. And it lasted until 1958, and then it was taken down the next year. And the one that was put up in its place was the modern Mater Dolorosa school that's now in Pulaski Park. Of course, you need a cemetery, and they were using the cemetery of Notre Dame because they were very tight with the pastor of the Perpetual Hope Church, and they used Notre Dame Cemetery in South Hadley. But in 1934, they finally bought a portion of the back of Notre Dame, and that's where many of the modern burials are, plus a priest circle. But right towards the very back of the cemetery are the burials from 1890 to 1934, because they didn't own that section yet, and they're all clustered towards the back, so it's a great thing to look at. So we're going to cover a lot of questions here. I'll describe many things we've been covering right now. But one last thing to mention is, along the way, there was 14 pastors for this wonderful church. And of course, the most important was that founder, Antoni Sikorski. But along the way were a lot of great pastors to really help out. Leonard Pokulski, 1935-1963, served the longest of all.
Now, quickly, before we continue with the rest of the interview, Just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or want to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, @yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially the special occasions and get-togethers. They are also good just for getting outdoors today. So getting back to our interview, tell us now about the large campus that surrounds it.
Okay, so many things grew up around it. That old church, started being built in 1901, finished 1903. The rectory attached to the back. Now I mentioned the convent was originally right back there with the church. Those two were built in 1906. The school lasted 1958. In 1959 it was taken down. The school bordered on Maple and Fountain Street, but right in back of the church. And the convent was right in between originally, but that only lasted conveniently for 5 years. And then they moved the convent onwards to a different location. In fact, to a couple small buildings on what is now called St. Colby Drive. All right, and then the rectory, of course, was attached to the back, and that rectory remained the whole time as being a rectory. Now, one thing that has happened along the way is that Monte Dolorosa ended up taking control of the perpetual church that bordered on Pulaski Park and Maple Street. This is the location of modern-day Monte Dolorosa School. Now, they took this over and they used it to their own advantage. They took it over in 1924, I believe, and they used it for all of the following: a school, an auditorium, a bowling lanes, and a chapel. And it had I believe, 3 floors, and the school was on the ground floor. And since there already was a school, they were using this as a backup location. And that's true of a lot of things, except for the social function hall, which they didn't have yet. So they used that. I think that was on the 2nd floor. So it was quite a large campus that expanded greatly in 1924 through the acquisition of the perpetual help.
So tell us about the neighborhood that is around the church campus.
All right, this has always been ground zero of immigration into Holyoke. The Irish came here first in 1848, and they settled in what would become Pulaski Park. And when they got better economically, they started building homes and tenement houses in this area along Fountain Street, Prospect Street, Lyman Street. And it grew and grew and got stronger. Now, the next group kind of come in was the French Canadians, and they lived right with the Irish. And they had their churches within 2 blocks of each other. The old Perpetual Help Church up to 1924 was right along Pulaski Park. And, of course, Monte Dolorosa Church was here. And the Irish were here too. And all 3 groups were together for a while. And that's incredible, but they had to agree with each other, get along with each other as much as possible, because it's a difficult life for immigrants. But of course, immigrants like to improve economically, and they would end up moving further afield. And
why was Mater Dolorosa Church taken down?
it was probably taken down because the church no longer really wanted to have ethnically based churches. And when you have ethnically based church, you're really serving a tiny bit of the population instead of a church that serves all ethnic groups at the same time, which is what most Catholic churches around the country really are. But in somewhere where immigrants are numerous, like Massachusetts, you could have ethnically based churches, but they really got away from that. Now they said they were taken down because the belfry, the steeple, was not intact enough, and it make it dangerous. I don't know if that's a great reason, because it didn't look that way when it started taking down. The wood looked intact. So thank you for coming on this podcast.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. You can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, that's holyokenowtour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in into our podcast. We are coming to you from Holyoke, Massachusetts, and I'm your host, Carrie, and I'm here with Robert Camus, our very own historian tour guide, who not only is the founder, but also the tour guide of the Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Massachusetts. You can check out his website for more information at holyokenowtour.org. There he has his videos, past, present photos, as well as his 2023 schedule. So today we'll be discussing the Mater Dolorosa Cemetery, which is located in South Hadley, Massachusetts. So what's with that old section of the cemetery?
Yes. Well, it's important to know that there was no Mater Dolorosa Cemetery in the beginning. There was a place in the back part of the Notre Dame Cemetery in South Hadley. And that was owned by Perpetual Help Church of Holyoke, Massachusetts. And Mater Dolorosa Church in Holyoke and Perpetual Help Church in Holyoke were about 200 yards apart from each other on Maple Street. And they got very close, and the priest of Perpetual Help, Joseph Marchand, liked to help out the Polish church, Mater Dolorosa. And so when they needed new burials, when they needed burial space, and they could not afford it, then they gave Mater Dolorosa Church a spot in the back of the Notre Dame Cemetery. And the Notre Dame Cemetery was started in 1892. The Mater Dolorosa Church was used in this back plot from about 1895. So this is some incredibly old stones back there. Now, it's curious to know that on a death certificate at Holyoke City Hall, you will see that Polish people have been buried in Notre Dame Cemetery. Because even though Perpetual Help Church allowed the Polish burials back there, it officially was still Notre Dame Cemetery. So all the very early death records in Holyoke for the Polish people say Notre Dame Cemetery, South Hadley. And they don't say Mater Dolorosa Cemetery. Now, Mater Dolorosa Church ended up buying that spot and a lot of more spots. They bought the back northeast corner, or whole quadrant, of the Notre Dame Cemetery. So they bought 25% of the land area that the Notre Dame Cemetery had owned. But that wasn't done until 1932. And when that happened, finally all the burials, very old burials before 1932, were now at Mater Dolorosa Cemetery. But all burial records still say Notre Dame Cemetery. So you have to be very careful. And you know very well the delineation between those two cemeteries is what a line of evergreen trees. You know very well they're back there. But some people might get fooled. And even the newspaper accounts, the obituaries for these people will say Notre Dame Cemetery, as if they're buried in the French-Canadian Cemetery. But that's not what happened. So be careful if you're a genealogist or a local historian on this fact.
So now, what's with the Malinowski gravestone?
Yes, so this might fool you also because of this reason. If you go into the Mater Dolorosa Cemetery and you're walking the line between Notre Dame Cemetery and Mater Dolorosa Cemetery, you'll walk a straight line with evergreen trees either on your right or left side, depending on where you're walking. And you can see all the Polish names on one side and all the French-Canadian names on the other side. But you come up to the Malinowski stone, which is a gigantic stone. And the back part of it has like 20 names on it. In the front it says two names, Samowski and Malinowski. Now, the story is this. The Malinowski family bought that plot from Notre Dame in 1930, which is 2 years before the land transaction between the two churches to divide the cemetery. And they put this big stone in, a gigantic stone, which would have been incredibly hard to move. The stone is like 10 feet high and very wide. And all the individual plots are flat stones in front of it. And it faces towards the Notre Dame cemetery. But the land itself is in the Monte Dolorosa cemetery. So in order not to block off the presence of the stone, have the stone face into trees, the trees that I mentioned before that divided two cemeteries, what they did was very crafty. This line of trees, after 150 yards, has a little angle back and then a little angle forwards. And in that little plot was the Malinowski family gravestones. And so they face into Notre Dame Cemetery, but they're on the land of Monte Dolorosa Cemetery. And by having the trees angled back, they have it so that the stone doesn't face into trees. It's a very beautiful system, and it helps you divide the two cemeteries.
So tell us about the World War II stones.
Yes, these are all in one line in Monte Dolorosa Cemetery. Remember, you're handing out memorial stones by the year, right? And a lot of soldiers from Holyoke were dying in 1944 and 1945. And as they were brought back, they would be buried. And I've counted up 9 stones almost in a row that have their burial right in that same line. It's hard to find, but if you go to the priest circle and then keep walking towards the west, you're going to see the second row inwards of gravestones is going to be all 1944 and 45 burials, and most of them are for the soldiers that had died. And then their family continued to bury the more deceased members of the family as the years went by. But again, gravestones are by the oldest burial on the stone. And so the 44 and 45 stones are all in a row. So you can see a very nice row of military stones.
Now, do you have any comments on the priest circle?
Yes, the priest circle, sure, it could be called a priest circle, but more likely it might be called a monk circle, because most of the people in that circle are more pastors of their church, which means a priest that serves at a church, either as head of it or as assistant, is called the pastor or the assistant pastor. Now, in there's only one pastor of Monte Dolorosa Church. There might be a couple assistant pastors, but then there's about 14 monks that had gone to the St. Hyacinth Seminary of Granby, Massachusetts, and either died during their students' days or died not being a pastor of a church, but as maybe they were in charge of archives or in charge of bookwork or in charge of personnel for the diocese. And they choose to be buried in the Monte Dolorosa Cemetery because it was such a beautiful place. Okay, so this concludes our Monte Dolorosa Cemetery tour of South Hadley. And the podcast might help you understand that little delineation. Thank you.
Yep, and again, thank you for tuning into our podcast. And again, you can check out his website for more information at holyokecanaltour.org.